June 26, 2025 marks the release of Death Stranding 2. It is, by my count, the 40th game that Hideo Kojima has either directed, produced, written, or designed, and every combination therein. At 61 years old, Kojima's name is often listed alongside other visionaries such as Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of Mario and many other notable Nintendo franchises, and Yu Suzuki, responsible for the Sega arcade boom of the later 80s and 90s. However, his name stands alone as the influence for modern cinematic gaming. But before Death Stranding, before Boktai, before Zone of Enders, before Metal Gear Solid, and almost before Metal Gear, there was a work that planted a seed in the minds of gamers as to what a video game could be. Not just an interactive screen with a set of rules and a singular goal, but a fleshed out world with well-written characters, compelling dialogue, and intricate lore, all presented with the obsessive detail of a respected filmmaker. A work that can be considered as the blueprint for Kojima's later works, and yet a work that is often forgotten in his gamography due to its proximity to the success of Metal Gear before and its sequel after. A work that is often forgotten due to the hardware it was created for, the language it was written in, and the consoles it was ported to. There have been no modern remakes. Buying and playing it in English is prohibitively expensive. And if you're under 30, you have likely never even heard of it. Hideo Kojima never wanted to be a video game designer. He wanted to direct films. Early in his life, Kojima was an introvert. He loved watching television and crafting his own figurines. Every night in his home was movie night with his parents. Their love of film was so sharp that they would not let their son go to bed until the credits had rolled. And no genre was off limits for their young son. In high school, a friend showed him his first Super 8 camera. This feels like such an important moment in Kojima's life. For the first time, he had the tools to make his ideas come to life. He and his friend immediately began making short films together and charging kids 50 yen for admission. When Hideo was 13, his father died. Due to the resulting financial difficulties his family had to navigate, he decided to major in economics in college. In what little free time he had, Kojima wrote stories in hopes of turning them into films. It was around this time that the budding filmmaker first laid his eyes on a Nintendo Famicom, or what we would call a Nintendo Entertainment System. And his imagination went into overdrive. Many people in Hideo's life didn't see filmmaking as an honorable job. So what would they think of a career in the then new and misunderstood field of video games? There wasn't even a word for game designer in Japanese at the time. In 1986, he was hired by Konami. He told his friends that he worked in finance. Very stealthy. After becoming enamored with the Famicom, the fledgling game designer hoped he would be able to work directly with the hardware, but Konami had other plans. Kojima was put to work on a sequel to a game called Antarctic Adventure, a simple, endless runner type game for the Japan-only MSX home computer. As if having something to prove, he added some unexpected features like equipment, upgrades, shops, gambling, power-ups, secrets, and multiple endings. At almost 40 years old, Penguin Adventures is surprisingly deep. In 1987, Konami saw the success of Capcom's Commando and commissioned a knockoff. After some delays, Kojima was tasked with saving the game whose development was floundering due to the technical limitations of the time. Under the new director's attention, a standard action-focused army run-and-gun transformed into a first-of-its-kind stealth game. Now, I don't mean to gloss over Metal Gear. It was the beginning of Kojima's rise to fame and his most popular and important body of work. However, I plan on giving Metal Gear, its sequel, and the Solid series the in-depth videos they deserve at some point in the future. In 1988, Kojima's first entirely original game was released, but only in Japan.
メタルギアを終えた頃から、コナミ社内での私に対する評価が変わってかいと、役職はだいぶ上がったんですが、それでも給料は安かったんです。それで次に何をすればいいのかわからなくなって、学生時代に夢中だったポートピア連続殺人事件みたいなアドベンチャーゲームを作りたいと思ったんです。
Portopia's serial murder case deserves a video of its own. Releasing in 1983 on the NEC PC 6001 home computer in Japan, it is a landmark in the visual novel genre and often considered the first detective game. Inspiring Kojima with its graphics, cinematics, and plot, Portopia also happened to be one of the first games ever played by Eiji Aonuma, the director of Ocarina of Time, and every Zelda after. The NEC PC series was a popular line of business and home computers during the 80s. The Osaka-based Konami had yet to release a game for the NEC PC 8801, so when Kojima came to management with the idea for Snatcher, he was told that his project would be exclusive to that platform. The rising star director agreed, even though he had never made a game for the 8801. Kojima knew he wanted to make an adventure game similar to Portopia for two main reasons. First, he by his own admission was not much of a programmer and had a difficult time with the development of Metal Gear, so he wanted to create in a genre that required a relatively simple script that he had complete control over. And second, he wanted his story told not entirely through text. With large graphical windows like those in Portopia, he could showcase characters and settings as the story unfolded. Artist Tomiharu Kinoshita gave these elements life, and along with Kojima, they embarked on creating Snatcher as if it were a film, rather than a computer game. Development lasted 18 months, longer than expected for his small team dubbed Metal Slave. Though I couldn't find any reason for the delay in my research, it seems that even in 1988, Kojima was already displaying his trademark obsessiveness. As part of Konami's stipulations, Kojima would also need to develop an MSX2 version of Snatcher, but by that point he and his team had plenty of experience with their work on Metal Gear the previous year. Visual novels and text adventure games are light on gameplay, almost by definition, and rightly so. The genre focuses on flexing your intelligence rather than your fingers. Most of what you'll be doing consists of selecting every option on the screen until you're able to move forward. You'll sometimes need to exhaust dialogue trees in order for a new line of investigation to open up. Other times you'll be able to move between screens in an area, or even hop in your turbocycle and fly to an entirely new location. Snatcher is almost open world in that sense. There aren't side quests per se, but there is certainly some enjoyable Kojima fluff. That said, it can be very difficult to know what the game wants from you in certain cases. You can think that you've exhausted every option, but it's likely that a new avenue opened without you realizing. Snatcher does give cues when this happens, but these new options are not highlighted in the dialogue tree, making the experience cumbersome from time to time. You'll also find computer terminals to type simple commands into or run a search on another character. There is one more gameplay element that is exclusive to the Sega CD version, which is the version we'll be focusing on. As we covered earlier, the original Snatcher was developed for the NEC PC8801 and then immediately ported to the MSX2. The 8801 was only sold in Japan, and the MSX line of computers saw great success there, as well as in Europe and South America, but very few of them ever made it to the US. Even so, Konami never released an English version of the game on either platform. Though both 8-bit computers, I think I prefer the MSX2 version aesthetically. You can also change the name of the main character in these releases. Upon release of the two home computer versions, the hype for Snatcher infected home console enthusiasts. Unfortunately, due to the game originally shipping on 5 floppy disks, no consoles that rely on ROM-based cartridge technology would be capable of running Snatcher. Coincidentally, that same year that Snatcher was released, 1988, was also the year that the very first CD-based home video game console was released in Japan, another NEC product, the PC Engine Super CD-ROM 2 system, also known as the TurboGrafx CD. Compact discs were still a relatively new technology in 1988, and even more so for video games. With music CDs you got higher quality music, but with games you got hundreds of times the storage. This meant not only CD quality music, but CD quality voiceovers, more detailed art, and animation. The Super CD version of Snatcher was released in 1992, again, only in Japan, but it laid the groundwork for all the ports going forward. An epic soundtrack, anime-style pixel art, and a far more cinematic experience. This was also the last version that Hideo Kojima would have any direct involvement with. Jumping forward a bit, we have the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation versions released in early 1996 as Japan exclusives. These two versions are very similar, with overhauled and, in my opinion, worse art, as well as a weird CGI prologue intro that replaces the original because 32 bits. Finally, we have the Sega CD version released in 1994, which is the version I'll be showing going forward. Why did I choose this version to cover rather than, say, the PlayStation version? One big reason. It is the only officially released port of Snatcher in English. And since Snatcher is a very text-heavy game, and the CD versions present information only in voiceover sometimes, this was really my only option. Honestly, from what I've seen, I do believe it to be the second best version, behind only the PC Engine port. And that is mainly due to the censorship it received for sensitive American audiences. It's still pretty violent though. And what was that gameplay element I mentioned before that is exclusive to the Sega CD? Well, I'll give you a guess. What do you think it is? Light gun support. All versions of Snatcher have short, shooting gallery type segments where the screen is divided into 9 squares, and you snap your cursor to these areas to fire at enemies. But if you have the Konami Enforcer that came with lethal enforcers, you can use it during the segments. Why did Konami bother including this for the game's 5 or 6 shootouts? The same reason the Sega CD version was released in North America at all. Because it would appeal to Western players. The whole reason we got the only English port of Snatcher was simple. Johnny American likes guns. To craft the cinematic anime aesthetic that Kojima was looking for, he recruited character designer Tomiharu Kinoshita. After Snatcher, he would later go on to design art for Space Manbo and SD Snatcher, both on the MSX. In 1993, Kinoshita would unexpectedly lend his talents to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters on the Super Nintendo, and his final game credit would be for Kojima's Policenauts in 1994. You may have noticed a familiarity with the art style of Snatcher. It's not generic anime, but you've definitely seen it before. It's on the tip of your tongue. Almost deja vu. Well, you aren't wrong. It turns out that Kojima was a big fan of the manga Akira, and directly told Kinoshita to emulate the look of Katsuhiro Otomo's groundbreaking 1982 work. The first versions of Snatcher look great for the hardware they appear on. Both the 8801 and the MSX came out in the early 80s, and even though most of the visuals appear in a small window with lots of dithering, they still look quite impressive for the time. The PC Engine Super CD version from 1992 took advantage of the leap in graphical and storage technology. Not only do the cinematics look like the anime they were always intended to be, but there's more color and animation. The Sega CD version is comparable to the Super CD version, but seems to be missing some of that color and animation. However, for the Sega CD, everything still looks wonderful. As I mentioned, the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation versions have a more airbrushed, softened look. The art does seem to have variations in certain scenes, but overall, is still quite similar to the 16-bit versions. As with the graphical presentation, Snatcher's soundtrack varies depending on if you're playing the original Japanese home computer versions or the home console versions. Many home computers released in Japan at the time relied on FM synthesis to generate sound. Probably the most common instance of FM sound most of you have heard is the Sega Genesis. Both the Genesis and the MSX share a similar Yamaha sound chip. The PC 8801 did not ship with sound capabilities at all, but later models came with FM pre-installed. CD-ROM technology brought with it CD-quality sound, and many of Snatcher's compositions were recorded with live instruments for the PC Engine release. As with the home computer versions, these tracks were composed by Masahiro Ikariko, who has worked on Gradius, Castlevania, Contra, and Goemon. He was also the main composer for Police Knots. The soundtrack was recorded by the Konami Kuki-Iha Club, kind of an in-house band at Konami, whose work can be found all over the company's output from the late 80s onward. If you get these two versions side by side, you'll notice unused songs in each game. For instance, the main theme on the 8-bit versions of Snatcher is called The Twilight of Neo Kobe City. The CD versions is called One Night in Neo Kobe City. These are used over the opening credits in their respective games, but they are two completely different songs. Both are great, but I enjoy the 80s pop vibe of the Konami Club recording. There are a few other instances of this in the game, but overall, the compositions are largely the same. Localization of Snatcher was headed by Jeremy Blaustein, with translation by Scott T. Hards. Blaustein would go on to localize Konami mega hits such as Metal Gear Solid and Silent Hill 2. Blaustein found a studio in the Chicago area that had a roster of actors ready to go for whatever the client needed. One of which was Jeff Lupetin, who would wind up voicing Snatcher's main character. He also happens to be the voice of the Raid Bugs? I watched quite a few old Raid commercials and I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is him.
Come on, what do we got to lose? Whoa, everything! Ready!
Lupetin plays the part with a playful bravado. His inspirations include Humphrey Bogart, Rod Serling, and Unsolved Mysteries host Robert Stack. In contrast with the Japanese voiceover, which is apparently played quite straight, Lupetin really does explore this real estate of emotions and tones. That's not to say that some of the lines aren't tongue-in-cheek or a little cheesy, but he commits to every line. And as a result, it is one of the strongest video game performances of the 1990s.
It's unbelievably light.
Gillian, what is it? What's wrong?
Jamie, I've become a junker. Dear God. No, if I could have gotten there just a little sooner, your father might still be alive.
Many of the actors don't seem to have many other roles to their names, as far as I can tell from my research, save for one, Ray Van Steen. Ray was a United States Air Force veteran, where he started as a machine shop instructor, but transferred to communications due to his childhood love of radio shows. In the late 50s, Ray got his start in the entertainment business, bouncing from New York to Illinois, and finally to Chicago, where he found success doing radio spots for national brands such as McDonald's, United Airlines, John Deere, Kellogg's, Allstate, Kleenex, and Kraft Macaroni and Cheese. The talented actor also starred in the parody spy radio drama Peter Fugitive in 1967, where you can hear early versions of parts he would go on to play in Snatcher.
Oh, yes. Put him on, operator.
All right, sir. Your party's on the line, Mr. Binder.
Oh, yes. Thank you, operator. Hello, Peter.
It seems you still have some fight left in you. You two are finished.
Ray would go from production director, creator, and producer at WLS Radio to full ownership of Studio One, the same studio that Jeremy Blaustein approached for Snatcher. Van Steen was also a voiceover teacher and likely coached other members of the cast at some point. Though Jeff Lupetin was the main character of Snatcher, Van Steen was the heart and soul of it, playing 6 roles, 5 of which are load-bearing, as well as the narrator of the story. Having spent time with these characters, I can testify to the range of this incredible actor. Ray Van Steen sadly passed away on February 22nd, 2024 at the age of 89, probably never realizing the impact he had. Thank you, Ray. We shouldn't overlook the rest of the cast, as almost all of them pulled at least double duty, and their performances are impressive for 1994. You have to remember that most gamers' first exposure to voice acting was probably the original Resident Evil in 1996, but let's be honest, though it's fun and campy, it's pretty bad. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. Snatcher has the best voice acting of any game I've played that came out before Metal Gear Solid. Better than Resident Evil 1 or 2. It was kind of a shock considering the Sega CD is known for its cornucopia of terrible live action, full motion video games that have atrocious acting across the board. Right from the start of the game, you can tell that Hideo Kojima loves movies. What you're looking at is effectively a legally distinct video game adaptation of Blade Runner. Not a faithful adaptation, mind you, more like an homage. Instead of 2019 Los Angeles, Snatcher takes place in 2047 Neo-Kobe, Tokyo. The setting is much the same though, sprawling megalopolis where the people are packed in like tuna, crime is rampant, neon signs are everywhere, and the world is recovering from a worldwide pandemic known as Lucifer Alpha. You play as Gillian Seed, an amnesiac detective who has been assigned to a special police force called Junker, Japanese undercover neurokinetic elimination ranger, whose sole purpose is to hunt down and eliminate the bioroid threat known as Snatchers, the game's stand-in for Blade Runner replicants. Gillian arrives at Junker HQ to a warm welcome from receptionist Mia Slayton. Mia introduces Gillian to his other co-workers, engineer Harry Benson and Chief Benson Cunningham. Your robot partner Metal Gear also makes its grand entrance here. Before long, Gillian is tasked with tracking down the only other Junker, Jean-Jacques Gibson, who calls in for backup after cornering a possible Snatcher. You rush to the factory, but Jean-Jacques is already dead, absolutely annihilated by a Snatcher. This part is your first real taste of investigation. Nearby, you'll find the remnants of Jean's Metal Gear known as Little John, who's been armed with a time bomb, no doubt planted by Snatchers. You'll then be attacked by some mechanical bugs in the game's first shooting sequence. As soon as they're dispatched, the building explodes, with Gillian and Metal Gear escaping with not a moment to spare. Back at HQ, everyone is mourning the death of Jean-Jacques Gibson. Mia is crying, and Harry the engineer is hammered. You don't have that luxury, however. You need to find out what Jean knew and why he was investigating the factory. After a thorough search of Jean's belongings, the evidence points you in the direction of a man named Napoleon, who tells you to meet him at Alton Plaza. Before heading over, you have the option to stop at Gillian's apartment. This bachelor pad is sparsely furnished save for a picture of Gillian's wife, Jamie, whose phone number you can find on the back. You can dial numbers at almost any time by accessing your robot partner, Metal Gear. Jamie and Gillian have a past together, but neither of them can remember it. Conversations are bittersweet as Gillian tries to rekindle a lost romance, while Jamie distances herself in an attempt to move on with her life. This dichotomy really injects heart into the story. After meeting with Napoleon at Alton Plaza, it's time to break the news to Jean-Jacques' daughter, Katrina Gibson. She's crushed, but not necessarily surprised. Her father was in a dangerous line of work. It's at the Gibson residence that you find out that Jean-Jacques was hot on the heels of the Snatcher's main weakness, and had also made a connection from that weakness to a hospital where it's treated. Your next stop is Plato's Cavern, a gray market bazaar that has anything and everything for the discerning junker. Here, you need to buy a mask for our next stop. Outer Heaven is not just a fictional country in Metal Gear. It's also the name of an Eyes Wide Shut style bar that is easily one of Snatcher's standout locations. It turns out that Jean-Jacques was meeting with someone at this Konami-themed strip club, and Isabella, Outer Heaven's star performer, can give you a description. Flying back to HQ, you use Alpha 1, a super powerful AI computer, to run the description through the database to find the identity of the mysterious stranger. After one false alarm that really cements how to spot a Snatcher, you'll turbo-cycle over to Freddie Nielsen's apartment. Freddie isn't home, but his girlfriend Lisa is. Your investigation leads to a mountain of red flags, and before you know it, you're face to face with Lisa, revealed to be a Snatcher, one of the same that killed Jean-Jacques. Investigating further, you'll find some interesting connections to Moscow and the Kremlin. Looks like Lisa wasn't the only Snatcher. Freddy attacks and is quickly dispatched by Random Hajil, bounty hunter extraordinaire. Anyone who is a fan of science fiction will immediately recognize Random's design as Fade Rotha Harkonnen from David Lynch's adaptation of Dune from 1982. Is Random friend or foe? He seems to only be in it for the money, and he did save your life, but you better keep a close eye on him. Now it's back on track to find the hospital that Jean-Jacques had theorized. You find a hospital, but it turns out to be a veterinarian. A frivolous location, but a fun distraction. Using her other job in the pharmaceutical industry, Jamie leads you in the right direction. But before that, Mia tells you that Katrina might be in trouble. You head over to the Gibson residence, but no Katrina. What you find is evidence of a struggle. Snatchers are no doubt nearby. Not being quite sure where to go, Gillian goes back to his apartment to gather his thoughts, only to find Katrina in the shower, who helps suss out the location of the real Snatcher hospital. The hospital appears abandoned, but it's certainly not empty, as you'll find another connection to Outer Heaven. You meet with Napoleon again, who helps you translate a note you found in the hospital, a note that reveals someone you know is a Snatcher, and someone else you know will die at their hand. And that's it. Snatcher ends on a cliffhanger. Is what I would say to you if we were playing the home computer versions. You see, due to the memory limitations of those machines, 3 of the 5 planned chapters had to be cut. But when the home console versions arrived on massive CDs, Kojima was able to add a 3rd act. And judging by how packed Act 3 is, I'm guessing he condensed those 3 missing acts all the way down into one. Originally, Kojima had hoped to make a sequel out of the missing acts, and he kind of did. More on that later. I'm honestly really surprised this is where the original game ends, because in my opinion, Snatcher is just kicking into gear at the end of Act 2. Act 3 is what makes Snatcher a Kojima game. It's where the whole mystery is unraveled, and the big twists have even bigger turns right behind them. The Cold War, nukes, clones, love triangles, amnesia, time travel, kind of, it's all there. My hope is that providing you with cliff notes and leaving you in the dark about the true ending will encourage you to seek out Snatcher on your own. It really is worth your time. And if you're a Kojima fan, you owe it to yourself to experience it. I already told you about the many versions of Snatcher. We have the Japanese home computer releases on the NEC PC 8801 and the MSX2 in 1988, the PC Engine version in 1992, the Sega CD version in 1994, and finally the Saturn and PlayStation versions in 1996. Besides the technological differences with graphics and music, there are content differences as well. We just touched on the addition of the 3rd act to tie up all those loose ends in the story, but there are some censorship changes too. Snatcher was released in December of 1994, just 4 months after the formation of the ESRB. Games getting released in the US were under strict scrutiny from the government at the time because of one Joseph Lieberman, a senator from Connecticut, who felt that a 16-year-old was too impressionable to play Mortal Kombat, but voted in favor of sending 17-year-olds to the Iraq War.
Isn't making a game and selling it that encourages a kid to point a gun at a television set and rewards his success or her success by increasing the firepower of the gun, encouraging criminality? I mean, we're all aware of this incredible outbreak of gun violence in our country. Is it responsible? Besides the normal cultural and name differences, the Japanese versions of Snatcher are a bit more gruesome and, boob-infested. And Katrina's age was changed to 18. From 14. I hate to say it, but this is not the only Japanese game that does something like this. It's just a drop in the bucket. Now it's time for contemporary reviews. As usual, we'll start with my favorite of the old gaming magazines, Electronic Gaming Monthly, issue 65, December 1994 to be exact. We've looked at a few EGMs on this channel, and this is the oldest so far. They did things a little different back then, and Snatcher has been relegated to a little blurb by Mike Wigan with scores from every editor. It's kind of surprising, since previews seem to stir up a lot of hype leading up to release. It's nice to see a game for an older audience. Snatcher is a great adventure that has an intricate plot and nice graphics,
While it is slow-moving at times, the story will keep you rooted to your seat. A top-notch Sega CD title.
How about Die Hard Game Fan Volume 2, Issue 12, December 1994?
Snatcher in the US. Thank you, Konami, for being a gamer's company. Snatcher is, simply put, the only game of its kind ever made available in the US. You'll find ungodly carnage, the greatest story ever, and an interface that is just the coolest in Snatcher. It's just pure quality. No Sega CD owner over 17 should be without it.
Next, the January 1995 issue of Video Games. Yes, that's the name of this magazine, Video Games.
All in all, Snatcher is a decent adventure game for the Sega CD. Nothing mind-blowing, but the story is interesting and unfolds rapidly enough to keep you playing. It does suffer from the cuteness of other Japanese RPGs, perhaps more so than most because of its heavy subject matter.
And last, I wanted to revisit EGM number 100 and its top 100 video games of all time list from November 1997, where you'll find Snatcher listed at 69. Nice.
It's a definite cult hit. Chances are not many people have played it, but almost everyone knows of its grisly storyline. Besides all of the gore, the game has an intriguing story, lots of cool plot twists, and plenty of R-rated appeal.
So what do I think of Snatcher? Well, it's been on my radar since its release, but I never sat down to play it until making this video. To be honest, the visual novel text adventure genre was never really my cup of tea, although I did really enjoy the first couple Phoenix Wright games. I usually prefer less passive experiences, but after becoming a Metal Gear Solid fan, I knew I needed to check Snatcher off my bucket list. Snatcher is definitely a game from a different time, a different place, and different technology. By the time this version came out in 1994, the genre and the Sega CD were dying. Visual novels have been far more popular in Japan. On the negative end of the scale, Snatcher often feels obtuse. There isn't any LucasArts-style moon logic, but the way you are expected to progress through an investigation is unrealistic from a human perspective. Looking at, investigating, and taking an object are all singular actions that must be taken in a very particular order, and then sometimes in reverse order. There were a handful of instances where I thought I had been down every avenue of investigation, only to look for help in a guide and realize I just hadn't done things in the right order. Because of this, I honestly don't know if I could have completed Snatcher without help. On the positive side, this is a Konami game, and it's also a Kojima game. Add those two qualities together and you know you're going to have a great experience. Even with the somewhat confusing and sometimes slow gameplay, at no point did I want to stop. Act 1 starts slow, but ramps up into Act 2. Act 3 is the main attraction, and those who play will know why. Snatcher is often cited as the game where Hideo Kojima started evolving into the auteur he is today. In his first entirely original game, he took the reins of development and leaned into what his trademark cinematic sensibilities would become. There is much here that you can point to and say, hey, this kind of feels like Metal Gear Solid. And sadly, if not unexpectedly, Metal Gear Solid is the shadow that Snatcher lives in. Kojima's 1998 espionage epic deserves all the praise it gets. It single-handedly popularized movie-quality camera angles, acting, and storytelling. It's also one of my, and many other people's, favorite games. Though there was never a true sequel, Japan did receive SD Snatcher in 1990 on the MSX2, a super deformed or chibi version of Snatcher that parodied the events of the original while also changing the gameplay to more of an RPG. There was also the spiritual successor Police Knots in 1994 on the NEC PC 9801, the follow-up to the 8801 that Snatcher was originally released on. Ports subsequently came out for the 3DO, PlayStation, and Saturn. However, not a single version was ever localized for English audiences. Luckily, fans released an English patch for the PlayStation version in 2009 and the Saturn version in 2016. And I think that's the main reason Snatcher is often forgotten outside of hardcore Kojima fans of a certain age. Just 2 nights ago, I was out on the town and I bumped into a friend I recently made. In passing conversation, I mentioned that I was working on a video for my YouTube channel. To gauge her level of familiarity, I asked her if she knew who Hideo Kojima was, and she replied that she loved Metal Gear Solid, and even used the word auteur. But she had never heard of Snatcher, and coincidentally, she's right around 30 years old. The only English version of Snatcher is 31 years old. It's locked to a failed add-on for a 36-year-old console, and there have been no re-releases or remakes. But maybe with Konami's remake renaissance, anything is possible. Snatcher resonates with me because it still feels fresh, even prescient in 2025. It's a story about an unseen threat in a panicked public, where cops and bounty hunters alike are tracking down these others in an attempt to exterminate every last one of them. The news tells you how dangerous they are and tells you how to spot them, but even then, the signs are subtle. A snatcher could be living next door to you. A snatcher could be in the locker room with your girlfriend. A snatcher could be in the bathroom with your daughter. And how would you know? How would you know? Thanks for watching.